I don't know about you, but I'm thankful to hear these comforting words from John's Gospel in the wake of this week's events. I am the good shepherd, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Because I was at the CBOQ New Pastors Retreat, I didn't hear about the van attack until late in the day on Monday. And once I heard the fact that the Wi-Fi there was even sketchier than the Wi-Fi in the back of the sanctuary here, my efforts to try to wrap my head around what exactly had happened were hampered. But eventually, the picture became clear enough, and I felt familiar black waves from the dark side of reality wash over and chill my soul. Toronto, we're not immune after all. Not that we ever were. There's plenty of darkness here we frequently fail to notice, much less confront, if for no other reason than the insanity taking place south of the border is so glaring these days. But no matter the reasons, we have often naively prided ourselves on the fact that things like this don't, can't, won't happen here. I soon realized that the current of disbelief in which I found myself swimming emanated from the recognition that Alec Manassian's van had burst a bubble as well as broken bodies. Who knows how long the waters from this storm surge will linger? I imagine the water lines from this flood will be visible on the walls and the psyches of Toronto for a generation, if not longer. The oily deposits of fear, astonishment, suspicion, and cynicism left in this van's wake, not just along Yonge Street, but across the city, will not be cleaned up quickly, easily, or neatly. In these moments, especially in these moments, it is important for us, the church, to remember and proclaim Jesus Christ as our good shepherd. That we do not grieve as a people who have no hope. That there is company for us, with us, in the valley of the shadow of death. Jesus lays down his life willingly, freely. He has the power to lay down his life and to take it up again. And he shares that life with those of us who are his own. He knows our voice. We know his voice. That is the meaning and the message of Easter in a nutshell. That is the good news of the gospel. We should embrace it. We should lean on it and lean on each other as a result of it, especially when the unthinkable happens. But we must also be sure not to privatize, sentimentalize, or internalize this good news. It's not just for us. It's not just about us. There are other sheep, Jesus says. Jesus' words aren't offered simply for our personal reassurance or as some divine memento to remember him by. Is the gospel reassurance? Yes, absolutely. Is the gospel refreshment? Yes, absolutely. Is the gospel renewal? Yes, absolutely. For everyone who drinks of what Jesus offers will never be thirsty. But that doesn't mean that the gospel is a pina colada served to us on a beach. No, the gospel is a cup of cold water a cup of living water handed to us during a race. I've long been taken by the phrase, "He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake," from the 23rd Psalm. It reminds me, and I think it reminds all of us, that this truth that we claim and proclaim isn't static. Righteousness isn't a possession that we have or don't have, a state that we achieve or fail to achieve. Rather, it's active and dynamic. It leads us somewhere. It takes us somewhere. This is how Jesus shepherds us, by leading us through the dark valley. We're not escorted around it or magically beamed up from it. This is why 1 John chapter 3 pairs so well with John chapter 10, with John's entire gospel, in fact. We are familiar with Jesus' identity as our good shepherd, at least I hope we are. Most people are familiar with the Christian concept of God's love, even if they don't buy it. After all, John provides us with the most famous verse in all of the New Testament, the most famous summary of the good news that we embrace and we profess. I know you know it well, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. And there's a reason why this verse is so famous. It's beautiful. It is both concise and comprehensive. All the essentials are there. But it's not sufficient. Not by itself. Because while John 3:16 describes, it does not embody. It articulates what we believe, but it does not instruct us in what to do with what we believe. That's why 1 John chapter 3 stands as an important and necessary corollary to John chapter 3. We know John 3:16 by heart. I would assert we should also know 1 John 3:16 by heart and embrace the apostles' exhortations, even as we embrace, especially as we embrace Jesus as our good shepherd. For this is how Jesus shepherds us. This is how we experience God's love as a calling as well as a promise. A calling to live as Jesus lived, a calling to walk as Jesus walked along these paths of righteousness for his name's sake. For we know love by this, that Jesus laid down his life for us. Jesus, the Good Shepherd. But here's the kicker. He laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and yet sees a brother or sister in need and refuses to help? Little children, let us love, not in word or speech, but in truth and action. And by this we will know that we are from the truth. By this. Not by the words we say, not by the doctrines we affirm or the creeds we profess, not ultimately. Ultimately, we show it by how we live, by how we love, how we pay attention to the world's needs, the needs of our brothers and sisters, and how we respond to those needs. That is how we know that we are of the truth and from the truth. And that's how the world really knows, that Jesus is in fact our good shepherd. Because God loves the world. Not just you, not just me, not just the decent, godly people. And let's be honest, when we refer to godly people, we generally mean those who believe and behave like we do. God absolutely loves people who believe and behave like we do. But God loves everyone else too. God loves the world. All of it. Every inch, every centimeter, every atom, every creature, great and small. Christ died and rose again on the third day to redeem all of it. And God calls us to love the world as God loves the world, to love each other as Christ has first loved us. We know this, we know love by this, that He laid down His life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. 1 John 3:16. If all we have, if all we know, if all we hold dear is John 3:16, it is not a given that we will lay down our lives for one another, that we will adopt God's love as a way of life after we acknowledge it, after we profess it, after we embrace it for ourselves. Because here's the thing, we can all live out John 3:16 right here, right now, exactly where you're sitting. Once a week, once a month, once a year. We can come here and sit and say we have put in our time. You can live out John 3:16 while getting your hair done. You can live out John 3:16 pulling through the drive-thru, watching a movie, or folding the laundry. You can even live out John 3:16 while robbing a bank, or cheating on your taxes, cheating on your spouse, defrauding an insurance company. Because John 3:16, when taken by itself, doesn't require anything of you except to believe in Jesus. To believe that Jesus is God's Son, whose presence in the world is evidence of God's love, which is something that you can believe while you do pretty much anything you like. But 1 John 3:16 won't let us get away with that. 1 John 3:16 gives John 3:16 context. 1 John 3:16 declares that Christ's sacrifice not only means something, it calls us to something. It calls us to respond to Christ's loving sacrifice with loving sacrifice of our own in this world, in this time. It calls us to lay down our lives for one another, just as Christ, our good shepherd, lays down his life for each and every one of us. For how does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses to help? Let us love, not in word or speech, but in truth and action. In short, 1 John 3:16 won't let us walk around with our head in the clouds or our gaze fixated on our own belly buttons, even when things are bad, even when things are good. And truth be told, the church, capital C, is always at its best when we step bravely into the dark valleys, when we dive into the dark waves of the world, because that's what demonstrates how much faith we truly put in the light that we have received. And that's not just true now, it's been true throughout the history of Christianity. It's been true throughout the last 2,000 years. We can be proud of this legacy. And those who are critical of Christianity, who boast that the world would be better off without the church, without this religion, show themselves ignorant of how the church has shaped this world, even as they often rightly point out our failings and our shortcomings. Because in this city, and in cities and towns and villages and hamlets across 6 continents, there are hospitals, schools, tutoring centers, food banks, thrift stores, homeless shelters, and we could go on. All started and often maintained by Christians of all stripes. And we've started them, and we labor to maintain them because that's the work that we've been inspired to do. When decade after decade, century after century, we have been inspired to understand and comprehend what it means to truly believe, for God so loved the world. All of it. Every inch, every centimeter of it. In those times when we have truly looked at the world with Christ-tinted glasses and heavenly grounded spirits, it has always motivated us to do more than just looked. It has motivated us to act, to share, indeed, to love others as Christ has loved us, to love as best we can, as we ourselves have been loved. To walk with our brothers and our sisters, even strangers and enemies, through the world's dark valleys and the soul's dark nights. To stand up and speak up for those who lack a platform and those who lack a voice. That is our legacy as a church. And that is what our city still needs from us, especially now, especially in the wake of the unthinkable. So I want to challenge you this morning, in the days ahead, get to know and take to heart 1 John 3:16. Get to know it as intimately as you know John 3:16. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. Because the Lord is our shepherd. He leads us beside still waters. He leads us down paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And while he is leading us, we shall not want. For on that journey, wherever love reigns, wherever love is given and received, lived and embodied, wherever love as Christ loves is demonstrated, the truly profound good news is that no one else will want either. No matter how dark the valleys or how deep the waves may become. Thanks be to God. Amen.